Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about some of my favorite books and perfumes that I would match to these books. Now you'll learn a lot about me today because I feel like my book taste is all over the place. There's a lot of popular books, a lot of bestsellers, and a lot of really niche books. So if you're looking for a book recommendation or a perfume recommendation, I think you'll enjoy this video. It's going to be a lot of fun, so get yourself a little warm beverage and let's talk about books and perfume. I have 8 books on this list along with about 8 perfumes. There was one book that I had multiple ideas for. So yeah, some book recommendations, some of my favorite books, and let's get into it. First off, we're starting off with Daisy Jones and the Six. One thing I'll say before getting into this video is I don't have a lot of the physical books. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, so I don't have a lot of books that I actually read the physical books. So I think about 5 of the 8 books I have physically right here. The other few of them are audiobooks, so I'll just insert photos of them. First up, we have Daisy Jones and the Six. This was adapted into an Amazon Prime TV show. I have read this book multiple times. I love this book. I not only have the physical book, but I also have the audiobook. I definitely recommend reading it from the audiobook because it's told in all dialogues. They have a full cast, so you get to hear everyone's voices. I don't really like the audiobook narrator of Daisy for some reason, but alas. This book is about a fictional band that is doing really well in the 70s. It's heavily based on Fleetwood Mac, like a thinly veiled Fleetwood Mac fan fiction, basically. So if you know anything about Fleetwood Mac, you know that there was kind of a couple within the band. They sort of broke up and there's a lot of drama within, but they never actually said what happened. It's so good. I've literally wept crying over this. I think I posted myself finishing this book on TikTok and it was my second time reading this and I was literally, my tears were coming down. So I'll link that below. Great book, very 70s. The show is great fashion. The perfume I'm going to recommend based off of Daisy Jones and the Six is Poets of Berlin by Wilhelm Perfumery. This is a niche perfume that is kind of on the higher end range. This is I'd say a somewhat popular niche fragrance. This is a vanilla fragrance. There's a bamboo note in the opening, which is really interesting. I think it's like a blueberry vanilla note. It kind of smells a little bit like blueberry pancakes. I have a friend who will wear this perfume and whenever she walks, I will literally smell her from so far away. This has a beautiful scent trail in the air and I just think it really smells like Daisy from Daisy Jones. I think that this is kind of what I think she would smell like. I mean, she probably smells like cigarettes and jazz club, but I don't know, I just think this is very her. I also think of this brand Wilhelm because they have a fragrance called 1978 Stockholm, which is inspired by ABBA, and I just feel like that perfume is very Daisy Jones and the Six, and that whole imagery is very Daisy Jones and the Six, but I decluttered that perfume, and I don't know if I think this smells Daisy Jones and the Six. It's more of the marketing. I feel like this one smells more Daisy Jones, in my opinion. I will say, everyone said that this is Thin Wild Mercury, which I think if I did like the Thin Wild Mercury perfumes, I would maybe recommend them, but I don't really like them, so that's okay. Next up, we have a book called The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. This is a thriller novel that I picked up over Thanksgiving break. I can't lie, I think the cover is kind of ugly. I just picked it up because I'd seen it everywhere and I didn't really have very high expectations. I like thrillers sometimes, but usually they aren't my favorite books because, they're just fun for an afternoon, and this book was no different. I think I finished this in 2 sittings, so I finished this one really quickly. It really surprised me. This was a great book. This is about a woman named Millie who was hired as a housemaid to this rich family, and basically the wife, Nina, is just a crazy psycho biatch and treats the main character like crap. But Nina just got out of prison and you're not really told why she got out of prison. You just know that she's kind of in a place where she's desperate for a job and she really needs room and board and this job. The couple are offering her a room in the house and it's kind of a little bit of a suspicious room. It gives her a little bit of the heebie-jeebies and it only locks from the outside. It doesn't lock from the inside. And so she's a little sussed out and Nina, the wife, treats her like crap. But then as soon as the husband comes in, Nina's like, oh my god, what happened? Basically, a bunch of really crazy stuff happens. I think I might read the rest of the series. I usually don't do that with thrillers, but this was extremely entertaining. I could read this over and over again. I'd recommend this to everyone. This was a very pleasant surprise. I read this so quickly and I just absolutely gobbled it up. And the perfume that I recommend based on this one is actually Sticky Dates by Lush, which is based off of their Sticky Dates body wash. I thought that the housemaid, the woman who's made to clean things, and this Windex looking bottle I thought would go well. This fragrance is supposed to smell like caramelized dates. It's based off of their Sticky Dates body wash, which was made for Eid. So dates, sweet caramel kind of smell. I had never actually smelled the Sticky Dates body wash, but I got this in PR and I sprayed it and I was like, oh shit, this is really good. So I just thought the theme of housemaid, the bottles kind of matched, and both of these were pleasant surprises. This is my favorite perfume from Lush, and I didn't really think I would like it nearly as much as I did. I didn't have any expectations. And same with this. I had heard this was really good. That's the reason I bought it. But like, I still didn't really have any expectations and it completely blew them out of the water. Both of these were just hits for me and I think they're really fun. Also, one thing to note about this perfume is that even though it is technically a body spray, this is so long lasting. Like, it will last on you forever. This is a really strong scent. The longevity is eternal. So it's definitely not giving body spray. So good. Now we're gonna take a complete turn in genre and I'm gonna recommend to you a book that I actually had to read for my literary theory course last semester, and I have read this over and over and over. This book recently went viral on TikTok for being the scariest book written. I personally don't find it very scary, but I could definitely see why it would be. This is House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. This is a book that's really hard to describe. This is a book that takes time to read. As you can see, I have it completely annotated. I have so much like things written in the book and stuff like that. I will describe the plot of this to you, but first I'm just gonna show you what this book looks like. This is the first page. I open it too. Like, books don't usually look like this. So this book is a thriller horror novel, sort of. I remember when I had to read this book for school, I immediately wanted to get the audiobook because I like listening to audiobooks more than I like physically reading. And she was adamant that this is not a book that you can get in audiobook form. And I was kind of like, what does that mean? And as soon as I saw this physical book, I kind of realized you can't really put this in audiobook. This book has layers and different stories going on at the same time. It starts out with the main character, Johnny Truant. He is the narrator of the novel. He's like a young 20s guy who's couch surfing. I think his friend Lude calls him over to this apartment in his apartment building and is like, yo, there's a man who lives in this apartment building and I think he died. And so Johnny Truant is like, okay, bet. He goes to this man's apartment. The man is named Zampano. He sees Zampano's apartment and there's like blood on the floor and Zampano has passed away. That brings us to the second layer of this book, which is Zampano. So Zampano was writing a book. He had a bunch of files everywhere about this book that he was writing, and so Johnny is finding this book and writing footnotes on Zampano's work. And Zampano's book is about this family called the Navidson family. It's about the husband, who just goes by Navy, Navidson, and the wife, Karen, and they have 2 kids as well. And it's about them, and they've just moved into a house, and Navy has been filming their family moving into this house to be like, I don't know, like a family documentary of them moving in, getting their first house. Basically, one day they realize that something is kind of going off about the house, like something's just weird about their house. And they measure it from the outside, and they realize that the house is larger on the inside than it is on the outside by like a 1/4 inch or something. House is essentially growing from the inside. Then they decide to go into the house and explore it. So basically, in the Navidson record, there's a lot of really creepy things that are happening in the house, and that is what's happening in the book. And meanwhile, Johnny Truant, who just is finding this book and reading it, is kind of organizing it, and he's writing a bunch of footnotes on top of it, and he's kind of also recounting his life as he's reading this book and things are happening to him. So this book has a bit of like a contagion aspect to it, where there's weird things that are happening in Navy's house that are also kind of happening to like Johnny Truant, and he's going a little crazy. And then I think the fear becomes the contagion of, okay, now I'm reading this and what's gonna happen to me. That's kind of the scary thing about this book. It goes a little kooky. This book also has different fonts and tons of footnotes. The footnotes get longer than the actual book at times. Part of reading this book is like figuring out what actual text to follow, because the footnotes are super long and they're like longer than the actual text, and there's just a bunch of random academic jargon. So this is the Navidson record, this is the font. And then at the bottom, you can see in the Courier Sans, this is Johnny Truant. Whenever Johnny Truant has something to say about the Navidson record that you're reading, bam, footnote, and then Johnny Truant will start talking. And he'll basically kind of insert his thoughts into this book. There's just a lot to talk about in this book. And part of the interesting aspect of this book is that so much is in here. I think it took him like 10 years to write this. And it literally, like, it talks about physics, it talks about literary theory, it talks about everything. So no matter what is happening to you in your personal life, something that is happening in your life will come up in this book. That's part of the interesting contagion aspect of this book that I think scares people, is that there's literally so much in this book that when I was reading this in class, people would be like, I was thinking about this, and then I opened the book and then it talked about it. This was the book that I brought to me in France because I was in France at the time that I had to write my essay on this book. When I was flying home, I was sitting in the Charles de Gaulle airport and I had like 3 hours before my flight takes off. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna start rereading this book. I open it up, and on the first page, it literally references Charles de Gaulle, which is the airport in Paris that I was sitting in and reading this from. Absolutely crazy. It's not a regular book, and the perfume that I recommend based on this book is Not a Perfume by Juliette Has a Gun. This is not a perfume, and this is not a book. It's a book, but it's more of an entity. This fragrance has notes of Cetilox, which is a trademarked fragrance ingredient that you can find in pretty much all the Juliette Has a Gun fragrances. It's usually used in like laundry and stuff because it doesn't have much of a smell. It has this aura of cleanliness. It has more of like a feeling of cleanliness, more so of a smell. It gives off this the idea that you have this like clean second skin, and it's just not a perfume. So that is what I'd recommend based off of House of Leaves. Moving on, this is another book where it's kind of not exactly what it seems, and that is Bunny by Mona Awad. Shout out Canadian author. Mona Awad is the professor of creative writing at Syracuse University, which I find super interesting because her writing is definitely creative. I would love to take a class from her. It is a book about academia. It is a book about, I don't know, it's kind of like a girl boss slay book. It's about this main character named Samantha, who is I think she's doing her master's or PhD in philosophy at this school. I want to say philosophy, it might be English, but I think it's philosophy. And so since she's in that like advanced program, she only has like 4 other girls in her class. And so it's just her and then these 4 girls who are all best friends, and they're all called bunnies. They do have individual names, but like everyone just calls them Bunny because they call themselves Bunny. So like whenever the girls are addressing each other, they'll be like, what do you want to do, Bunny? I don't know, Bunny. What do you think, Bunny? Let's go get Pinkberry, Bunny. That is literally how they talk. And Samantha is so annoyed by them and can't believe that she has to sit in every class with them because she doesn't relate to these girls at all. But Sam doesn't really have friends. She has one friend named Ava, and Ava, I don't think Ava goes to her school. I think she's just friends with Ava. But basically Sam doesn't really have a lot of friends. She doesn't really mingle with the girls in her group, and one day she sees a note in her mailbox that invites her to the Bunnies smut salon, and it's kind of their like creative writing night. So Sam is kind of like, these girls are really weird, I don't really relate to these girls, I make fun of them all the time, but they're inviting me and I kind of want to be part of something. So without spoiling anything, it's kind of about her experience with the bunnies and all the craziness that unfolds after that. I will say this book is definitely written creatively. If you're reading it and you're sort of like not sure if what is happening is really happening. I was very confused the whole time I was reading it, but then as soon as I finished it, I was on a mission to figure out what actually happened and get all my questions answered about this book. And I feel like that's what I really liked. Like this book really took hold of my brain and I got to do a ton of research on it, and I really liked that about this book. When I looked even harder and I did figure out this book, I liked it so much more. It has like a 3-star rating on Goodreads because you either rate it at 5 stars or you rate it at 1 star, and there's kind of no in between. I was definitely on the 5 stars, and this is what I chose 2 perfumes to recommend based on this book. First one is Bianco Latte because again, the bunnies are very girl boss. I think they wear all pink. They call each other Bunny. They are like the epitome of Elle Woods at the Halloween party. And so I recommend Bianco Latte because I just think this is like sweet caramel vanilla, very easy and also super popular. So that is what I would recommend based on the bunnies. And I also recommended Athalia from Parfum de Marly because this fragrance is bitter orange, it's incense, it's iris, and it smells mature and a little sinister. It smells like a hot woman, maybe a businesswoman, but you kind of smell this on her and you have the idea that there's something ceremonial happening at home. Like, you know when someone has been burning something and that kind of hangs onto your clothes, and that's what I get with the incense of this, but it's not overpoweringly incense. There's just a hint of it. There's this kind of side of mystery to this fragrance, or to anyone who wears it. So I think it's mysterious, alluring, seductive. I don't know, I just think that this is very bunny. This was originally my first pick of this book, but I wanted to add in Bianco Latte because the bunnies wouldn't smell like this. They would smell more pink, girl boss, femme, caramel, vanilla, but maybe mixed together. There's definitely both, and I couldn't go with just one because this book has both. Next book I have is Kim Jiyoung, born 1982. This is translated fiction. It's a super short book. It's only about like 100-200 pages. This book is phenomenal. This book talks about sexism in Korea, but I would say some of the things that happen here could be brought into just generally East Asia, or honestly the world. This is kind of a book written about an every girl. So Kim Jiyoung, that's a really popular name in South Korea. It's about her life, growing up, entering the workforce, becoming a mother. And the book is really interesting because the author had done a ton of research on specific legislation in Korea, different political issues throughout the specific years. And so in the book, it'll talk about, okay, this is something that was happening, and it'll sound like something that is so crazy. And then at the bottom of the page, there will be a footnote that is actually linking to a real thing that happened. I think this book caused a lot of stir when it was released because, again, this book is a political statement. It's about sexism, specifically alluding to and blatantly pointing at a lot of the sexist practices, especially in the workforce and just in general, especially in South Korea, becoming sexualized, not getting promotions when you should get promotions at work, having to leave the workforce and become a wife. This is a great book. It really opened my mind. I love translated fiction, especially from Korea. I've read a lot of Korean novels. I really like the feminine rage. I don't know, I just really love this book, so I highly recommend it. And the perfume that I matched this to is the brand new Juliette has gone Ode to Dullness. This is a fragrance that smells like tonka bean, sandalwood, cotton. I really like this launch because usually I feel like fragrance brands try to do something extravagant. They're like, oh, this is our new perfume. You've never smelled anything like this before. And this is a perfume that's inspired by dullness and sitting at home and comfort and coziness, which again, this book is nothing, there's nothing comfort and cozy about this book, but at the same time, this book is about an every girl. It's about a faceless woman with a very popular name, and it's kind of a story that could apply to aspects of what happens to this woman's life that happened to a lot of people at the time and still happen. So I kind of think that this, the every girl, there's nothing exceptional about her life because of the way that it's set up and the way that she's kind of set up to fail in a lot of the things that are happening politically in this novel. No, I just think Ode to Dullness matches this book. It's also a great perfume, especially if you want to read. It's very cozy, and this is a great book. I highly recommend it, and I think you should try it. The last books that I'm going to recommend are audiobooks, so I'm just gonna like put up photos of them. First up we have I'm Glad My Mom Died. This is by Jeanette McCurdy. I followed Jeanette McCurdy on Instagram for a long time, even before this book was out, and I remember she was doing a tour before this book came out, and it was kind of like a one-woman show called I'm Glad My Mom Died, and I remember being very interested in that title and kind of what that pertained to. I've always really liked Jeanette McCurdy. Her humor has always really resonated with me, even before I knew much about her, but I did grow up in the time where iCarly was my favorite show growing up, so I knew who she was, I loved her. And then so as soon as she released the book, I had to get my hands on it, and I did obviously listen to the audiobook because she narrates it and she does an amazing job at doing so. This book kind of talks about her rise to fame per se, so she was kind of thrust into the spotlight as a child actress. Her mom was the one who pushed her to start acting, and she kind of grew up in a abusive scenario where her mom was a hoarder. She had a lot of other brothers, so her family had a lot to do, a lot on their plate for sure, and her mom was kind of going through cancer throughout her whole life, and so Jeanette felt this kind of duty to her mom, I guess, because her mom always wanted to be an actress, and so she was kind of giving that gift of acting to Jeanette. So the book is kind of about her growing up, unlearning some of the things that she learned through growing up, and kind of finding her own as someone who was like a child star for so long. Things were out of her hands for a really, really long time. You can see through this book. I just think that this book being written shows so many revelations. Like, to be able to look back at yourself in this kind of way demonstrates a lot of maturity and a lot of vulnerability. Even if you can't, like, I can't personally relate to being a child star or anything in that way, but I still think that there's something so candid and vulnerable to the way that she's talking. You can really relate to her bitterness at times and being an angsty teenager, just being a human being with feelings. And I think that's why this book did so well, despite Jeanette McCurdy being a Nickelodeon star and this book being a New York Times bestseller and people picking it up who never watched Nickelodeon. I think that that really speaks to her vulnerability and just how amazing and like raw and stripped down the story is. So the perfume that I'm going to recommend based on this book, and kind of perfume that I would recommend to Jeanette McCurdy, is Arizona Bloom by Floral Street. This perfume is kind of inspired by like the nomad, the wanderer. It's supposed to be a perfume that you smell and it makes you want to travel and do new things and carve your own path. And so I sort of like that like independence idea of this fragrance. And I also think this perfume is so vulnerable smelling. Like it's a coconut scent, but it doesn't smell like summer and sunscreen at all. It smells like the scooped out flesh of a coconut, which honestly just smells like cream a little bit. So it smells like you just kind of came out of the ocean and you're like starting your life, you know? It smells like you just came out of the ocean, the sun is shining on you, and you have so many possibilities. This is a beautiful scent. It's a little green. I'm not sure if there's a fig note, but I sort of pick up a fig on this. One of my favorite perfumes for a long time. I just think I could drink it. It makes me feel so happy and so safe in my own skin, and I just really love it, and I think that really inspires me, and I feel like Jeanette would really like it. So I recommend this to her, kind of motivated by the vulnerability that she's demonstrated in her book. Right, we have 2 more books left, so we're almost done. The next book that I would recommend is Rebecca from Daphne du Maurier. This is a book that I listened to the audiobook on YouTube actually. I just looked up Rebecca Daphne du Maurier audiobook and I found like there was like 4 or 3 parts on YouTube for free. I can link the video below if you guys want to listen to this book. This book changed me. It is a classic novel written by Daphne du Maurier. You guys might know it as an Alfred Hitchcock film because it was adapted in that way. This book does have a lot of cinematic significance in terms of Hitchcock. One of my friends who studies film in university thoroughly studied this film and kind of the ways that the film cinematically adapted to the story. This book is so beautiful. I've watched so many reviews of this book and I think that one consensus about this novel is that it is written so descriptively. It is written as though the house is a character. This is a book that follows a main character who doesn't have a name. You never figure out the name of a protagonist, which I think is really cool. And it's about this woman who meets a man. They quickly fall in love and he says, let's get married. You're gonna move into my house called Manderley. So she goes to, I think it's in England. She goes to his house, moves in with him, and he has this giant manor called Manderley. I listened to the audiobook who had a British accent, so it was Manderley. So she moves into Manderley. There's a bunch of wait staff. There is a head of the house. Her name is Mrs. Danvers. The main character realizes that the man that she has just moved in with was recently married and his ex-wife just passed away and her name was Rebecca. The main character is kind of in the shadow of Rebecca. All of the house staff, Mrs. Danvers, loved Rebecca. The house has Rebecca's name on it, basically. She feels like she smells Rebecca's perfume in rooms and she sees Rebecca's handwriting on things. So she's kind of, it's haunted by Rebecca almost, even though she's never met her. And I just think this book does a really good job of like identity almost, because the main character doesn't have a name. You never figure out her name, but you know so much about Rebecca. This book is mysterious, it's fun, it's atmospheric, it's a little gothic, beautiful, and I loved listening to the audiobook. I watched the movie as soon as I finished the book and I just love it. I really want to get like an old classic edition of this novel to have and display because this book is so incredibly beautiful. One of the prettiest books I've ever read. It's so incredibly well written. It's not written super old-timey, so I found it pretty approachable. It's definitely very descriptive, so it is maybe a little slow at times, but I still was always excited to read it and I was always interested in what was happening. It held my attention super well and I really like that. So the fragrance I would recommend based on that is Angelique Noire by Guerlain. This fragrance is a classic. This is a fragrance that is the Art and Materials collection from Guerlain. This is a beautiful vanilla scent that is pretty, but there's something interesting to it. It has angelica, which is one of the most expensive fragrance ingredients. It just smells like home, but a little dark and a little bit gothic to it. It kind of smells like a warm cup of tea, super classy, and it's one of those perfumes that makes me feel like a more elegant person, like I'm more classy. And Rebecca's a book that makes me feel more refined. Like even having read it, I'm like, yeah, I read Rebecca. Honestly, there's like a little pretentious side of me that feels like this book is a little pretentious and this perfume is a little pretentious and kind of like that. Honestly, I kind of like it sometimes. That's why I recommend this perfume. It's beautiful, I love it. The final book that I'm going to recommend is called The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. Sometimes when I talk about it, I cry and I'm going to try not to cry, but this book moved me. This is a book that is set in Iran in the time of the war, and it follows this woman as she grows up. So it's kind of like, I've heard people describe it as like a Persian Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. It is in a way. She doesn't have 7 husbands in this book, but it does read in the way where it's kind of like past, present, like it does follow her through her life, and you can sort of see choices that she makes and how that unfolds, and it's so beautiful and so tragic and so happy and so sad at the same time. And it's a love story about this woman who falls in love with I think he was a soldier. I read this book almost a year ago now, so I don't have all the details completely correct, but basically she meets this boy at a stationery shop and they start passing notes through the man who owns the shop. So she'll leave a note to him and he'll give the note to her man, and the man will leave notes through the guy. And the guy will give notes to her. And it's a time where it's really unsafe for them to see each other, and even reading books, access to knowledge is something that's kind of political too, so even being in the shop is kind of dangerous, but they're still risking it for love. And the main character eventually does end up moving to America and kind of finding her own in America, and I won't spoil anything that happens, but obviously moving from Tehran, Iran to, I think it's San Francisco, there's an extreme cultural difference. So there's a lot of imagery about whenever she meets other Persian friends and gets to make Persian food and is kind of like reconnected with her culture. There's these beautiful descriptions of the saffron that she's cooking, spices, the foods and the atmosphere and the smells that remind her of her home. And there's specifically a lot of mention of saffron. And so for the perfume that I wanted to recommend to this, I wanted to find a perfume that smelled like saffron. My camera died in the middle of that, or well, it didn't die. I thought I kept filming and then all the footage got corrupted, so I'm just gonna like talk about this part. But I chose Kayali's Vanilla Oud, which is a newer fragrance, and it's definitely like a fluffy, like easier oud, but it has a nice opening note of saffron, and it's also an oud fragrance, which I know is very popular in the Middle East. So I kind of wanted something that didn't just have saffron, because she wasn't just talking about saffron, but it was kind of like anything, like all of the smells. There's literally anything that would remind her of home. And so I feel like this has a good combination. Vanilla Royale is so beautiful and so fluffy and so romantic, and so I thought that this perfume equally as romantic as this book was, and it has that saffron note that I needed for my criteria for this book. So Vanilla Oud is the perfume that I would recommend to Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. Okay, and that is the end of my video. We've gone over 8 of my favorite books. I still have so many more books that I could talk about, so let me know if you'd want a part 2 for this. I definitely could do so. Comment your favorite books and your favorite perfumes, or perfumes that you would match to your favorite books. Please follow me on Instagram, follow me on TikTok. Like this video if you enjoyed it. I will definitely love to make more. I love books. Leave a comment for what you want to see in the next video, because I'm trying to make that YouTube comeback, so I definitely appreciate all of the tips and pointers and suggestions that I can get. So yeah, let me know. I love you guys. Thank you again so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.